Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today. Sorry if my voice was a little bit different in the last two videos. Whatever throat problem I had a month ago seems to have come back again. I have got it checked out by a doctor and they think it was a recurring virus or something, but luckily this time it wasn't as bad as before. And for whatever reason when I had it this time it coincided with mouth ulcers, which I think was just bad timing, because to be honest I was eating lots of junk food around the time. But luckily my voice has come back so I can actually record again and not have to feel uncomfortable when doing so. So I've really enjoyed doing these stories. So I hope you all really enjoyed these stories, and make sure you check out my Patreon if you want early access to my stories, which is in the description. And make sure you check out my podcast, which is also in the description, where you can hear all of my videos posted there too. I have a quick message before the video starts too. And for today I'd like to share that even if things are going bad in your life and not exactly how you want, or even going all against you, it's up to you to make a decision and decide that you're going to be greater than it and overcome all of it. Having that kind of mindset and choosing strength is something that can actually go a very long way. And I think even some people that haven't tried it before might be really surprised by the strength that they have within. I think everybody has that and doesn't necessarily realize it. So make sure that if things are going bad, don't judge it too much. Just accept that it's a rough time and choose to have the strong mindset and to overcome it. Brighter days will come, you just have to keep putting in the effort and you will overcome it, and I believe in you. So I hope you're all doing great and enjoyed these stories. I'll speak to you all soon. One of the weirdest experiences I had was during the start of my career. In fact, it was so early as being a ranger, literally my first day, that I didn't think much of it. I thought, well, it's probably just my mind just running around because I'm new to this thing. Basically, I had to go and investigate a backpack somebody left there. Nothing too bad. It was just somewhere that it really shouldn't have been, and we needed to make sure it wasn't anything bad. As I approach, I get this weird warm feeling which comes across my body. I look up and there's kind of a distortion near a tree. It's really hard to focus on it, and I actually have to move forward a bit to make out the silhouette of this. I'm completely perplexed as to what this could possibly be, and I have to walk closer to figure out what it is, and I can't. What's really weird is that I hear breathing now, very faintly but coming from near the tree. I think maybe this is some kind of really advanced thing that maybe somebody's got out here, like some hunting thing or God knows what. It's kind of like a cloak. I get to probably 3 inches away and I can make out this thing is very tall. I raise my hand up to touch where it is, and that's when I see what are very clearly teeth. They're kind of like a black metallic colour. It blends in with the tree really well from where I'm standing, and I can hear the breathing more now. What's really weird is something drips onto my hand and it does actually become wet. I quickly wipe it off and look down at my hand, look up, and this thing is gone. I knew something was definitely there because I was a bit wet now, and I think, wow, this is the kind of thing that happens when you start this job. Thinking that maybe you just have to watch your mind in the forest, I decided to go and check out the backpack, thinking that I'm very paranoid of it and I'm just imagining things. But however, the more the times went on, the more and more weird I think this whole thing was, and that I kind of wish it happened later in my career, because I wouldn't have been so quick to dismiss it. One of the weirdest stories I've ever heard happened is not my own, but my father's. My father works as a Forest Service worker, and he had many weird encounters over his years. This one in particular gave me chills all throughout my childhood, and it made me constantly just question things. Now, I'll tell this exactly how my father's told me and how that he's wrote it down for me, so sit back and enjoy. I think it's truly bizarre. Now, to start out, everything's going pretty well in life. I'm happy and my wife is now pregnant. Now this is going to be our second child. We already had our other one who's about 1 now, and we're really excited to have a second. We had a boy and we were hoping for another girl. It turned out that we had another boy, but that was just as much joy into our lives. Those who haven't experienced parenthood don't understand how it changes your life sometimes, and how it changes your approach to taking risks. I know that I certainly had the same feeling too. Now, where I was based at for my job, I didn't really encounter anything too heavy. I hadn't been working this role for that many years, and there was other more experienced guys out there. In fact, a lot of the time I'd actually get quite frustrated because I really truly wanted to do more, but I just wasn't able to. Sometimes there would be things that the other guys would know that I could do, and they would just rush off to do it before I had the chance to, and it was so frustrating. I enjoyed being out there, don't get me wrong, but I was kind of stuck doing more computer stuff and just, I guess, the boring things. Now, at this place, I knew that I could progress, but it was going to take years. They basically offered me all the training and everything, but my god, it was slow. The thing was, I was probably smarter than all of the people there, just not being given any opportunities that I needed to progress. It was almost like they'd given me this form, and it said everything I needed to do, but there were holes in it that they couldn't see, and it made me feel really uncomfortable. I was quite tempted to join the Navy. I actually wanted to become a Navy SEAL at the time. It wasn't really possible because of some of the injuries I had, but I know that if I really pushed myself, I probably could have overcome them. But the problem was, even sometimes when I was doing this job, even just hiking around and doing my normal things, I would have a pain that I couldn't seem to stop from the bottom of my foot. I actually still have issues with it today. I'm not quite sure why it started, but yeah, it's just something I get on with. So on this particular day, it was just the same. There was more exciting call-outs and things to go and do, but literally before I could even get to the radio to say I would do it, someone would say I'm on it and would already be up there with their coffee in their hand, taking the last sips of their coffee before flying on out the door and to go and have all the fun. Yeah, it kind of really sucked doing this, but I guess it gave me more time to think and just relax a bit. The problem is, if you're like me, that time very quickly lends to boredom. I started going through some of the records and some of the reports. I basically had to reorganize them because some people in this office area, they would just throw everything onto a desk and not do anything. They would only look for items if they needed it, which of course is a very stupid idea and wastes everyone's time, but back in my day, I guess that's how it was. So I start reading through some reports. There was a few pretty creepy things on there. Some people would say that they had a feeling, like an intense feeling of fear that they couldn't describe, accompanied by a knocking on some of the trees. They were never able to locate the source of this sound, and they thought it was just animals, but it came up quite often over the years. Then I heard a really strange one. Apparently, there was a ranger that worked here, and a lot of the other people thought that he was going crazy. I was reading a second-hand account of what had happened to him. Apparently, something had spoke to him and told him the future. Weirdly though, when I looked back through another account, which was more recent than that one, some of the things that he said actually come true. And the person making the report actually noted that and how weird it was. Upon further investigation, it turned out that this person thought that he had spoke to beings or something. I don't know, kind of like aliens? They didn't describe it very well, just very vaguely. Now it seems like many of these cases were dismissed. There were other weird things too, like a specific area where you'd feel very hot. Completely unnaturally, to the point that you'd actually question if there was some kind of hot spring there. Or something weird that shouldn't have been there. But again, they could never find the source of it. The thing that made this even more bizarre is that eventually the plants and trees and everything in the area would start to die, so you basically knew for certain that something was definitely off there. Now I decided that I had to get out and do the very minimum just to not be in the office, and that's what I did. I remembered setting out and I was being a little bit more paranoid than normal. I think all these stories were just playing in my head. I remembered I kept thinking that I saw something walking through the tree line above ahead of me, always maintaining the higher ground. It kind of just trailed alongside me. It's really hard to describe, but was truly creepy. Now I don't know what it was, but I think it was some kind of large animal there. Not big enough to be a bear, but certainly weird. I did think maybe it was a hiker out there, but it wasn't possible. I thought that was bizarre. I remember thinking to myself that you've just learnt the power of human potential in the mind, and it was pretty scary to me. Now, life goes on. We probably get to about a month or 6 weeks in, and again, they're just not training me properly. It's kind of really annoying because they'll complain at me for doing something when it's exactly how somebody's told me to do it. And they'll say, oh no, just do it confidently. But then they'll say, why did you do that? And you'll explain that's how you're trained, and they wouldn't seem to listen, and it was kind of like a hostile group. I didn't end up staying there for too long, but I'll get to that later. So what do? Once again, get reserved to balancing the books and just doing the normal work. Now this is actually at a time before we had computers, so it did make days very boring too. The problem I found is that some people just did not have good handwriting. I've never been the best at reading others' handwriting, but especially in these situations, my god, it was like some of these people had honestly made an effort to write as illegible as possible. And again, if you can't read it, they complain, so I kind of become an expert of reading these things eventually. And again, every so often there's weird reports. I realise too, quite often when it's recorded, people just think, oh, it's the other guy not paying attention. Maybe he wants everyone to look at him and stuff like that. At least that's on the report conclusion, but I had a feeling that something was off when I kept on seeing the reportings of some kind of beings out there. This spanned over a number of years too, and long before I was there. They all seemed to be described as relatively the same. They called them the forest walkers. Apparently they seemed to be quite tall, and they would walk in almost a weird limp motion. The weird thing is that they would be silent too, and if you approached them, weird things would happen. Some people said they felt almost like they were high. Others said that they would just know things they couldn't have otherwise and stuff like that. I don't know if I believe in the supernatural that much, or at least at the time I didn't, but I just considered that these were just things that happen when you've been out in the woods for too long by yourself. Now eventually as time increased, and I started complaining to the higher ups about the issues I was having, I started to get out more and do more interesting things. I even got to rescue a few people too, which is a really cool feeling. I don't know if you've ever experienced it before, but there's something so cool about knowing that you preserved human life. You stepped in and you made a big difference and impact for someone. It's not something I'd felt before in other jobs too, so I was quite happy. Now, as I go out for a patrol one evening, I remembered having a strange feeling that the air was different. There was almost some kind of metallic smell that I couldn't quite describe. I was concerned that I had some kind of illness or that I accidentally got something on my nose, but no matter how much I wipe my nose, I can't seem to get rid of the feeling. And there was almost some kind of static in the air. You know, like when you have static electric and just before you feel the buzz, it was kind of like that. Now that's when I feel something. I can tell something's looking at me and I stop to turn around and see what it is. And then I can make out some kind of figure. It's probably about 20 feet away. It's wearing kind of like a dark coloured robe, but when it gets closer it appears more white. It walks with a weird limp and I can't believe my eyes. I actually rub my eyes quickly, not sure for a second if I'm dreaming, and it's gone. Now I think this is pretty creepy. I want to figure out what this is, so filled with excitement I actually jogged towards where it was. Now I couldn't tell you too much else about it, but just that it completely vanished. I probably spent another hour myself actually searching the surrounding areas, just to see if I could find something, anything there to explain what I'd just seen, but alas, I come up blank. There's nothing there but myself. Now I'm actually a little bit irritated because I don't want to seem stupid. I really don't want to become like one of the people whose stories I've read, probably to be dismissed later on the same way that I dismissed some of theirs. But currently, it seems like I'm going to have no option but for that to be the case for myself. Yeah, it sucked really. I go back eventually and tell them what happened. Now, no one believes me, which is what I expected, and they say, yeah, you're too junior to be going out there and investigating things like this. I was pretty fed up again. I come from a role before where I was very well respected, and honestly, the way I was being treated was really annoying me. Now, a few months go on, and it becomes winter, and the going gets a little bit more tough, really. It was pretty cold out there. I mean, uncomfortably so for myself. Now, I remembered on one particular day, I can't tell you specifically what I was doing, I just remembered that I was out there, that I spotted something weird. I mean, really bizarre. There were these small figures, kind of limping around in the woods, again silently. Now, I can't believe what I'm seeing. They're probably about 5 feet tall now, and in more of a white coloured gown kind of thing. Like I said, I didn't know what this was. I thought maybe it was something from Halloween, like decorations people put out there. And I actually wasn't too scared now. I was convinced that this wasn't actually a real thing or threat or danger, so I decided to sit back and very slowly follow these things. Now, I didn't look behind myself, so there could have been more, but these things just kept on marching on, kind of down the path for a good 10 minutes longer. Now, they never once seemed to notice me or so much as turn around, so again, I'm still not entirely sure what I'm seeing, but I think it's some kind of Halloween decoration that someone's playing around with. I don't know, it could be a cult, it could be anything, but I'm not too worried. I don't know if it was the size of them or what, but I just wasn't concerned. Also, there seemed to be nature interacting normally around, so that meant that these things weren't a threat, at least I thought. So this continues on until eventually they all stop at something. I stopped too, and I can see about 4 of them. I was incredibly curious as to what they were looking at, but there's no real way for me to be able to see where I'm based currently. I get closer and closer and realize that I'm going to have to take the long way round now to figure out what it is. I decide to take a stealthy approach, and I try and walk very slowly through the foliage and get around. I do make it to a pretty good horizon, and I can see in front, and I still can't figure out what they're looking at. Now, I'm sure these are people now, so I become a little bit more confident, and I walk down even closer to where they are. Eventually, I ended up crashing through some of the brush, and I decide that I'm going to be more present now. Obviously, these people know that I'm here, so what's the point of trying to hide away from them? I go a little bit quicker now, and eventually go round to where I think that they're facing, and I can't see their actual faces. It's kind of just dark where that their faces are completely covered up in something. Now, I crouch down to get a better look at them, and suddenly, I can hear voices in my head. They don't sound like voices I ever heard before too, and it's almost like my own voice but different. And I keep hearing different things that haven't happened yet. I hear about the birth of my son and know that it's going to be a boy. I know exactly what he's going to look like, how my career's going to go, what my wife's going to do, and some of the hardships that come up and who's going to pass away in my family. It actually makes me incredibly emotional at this point, and I almost feel like it's too much and start to cry a bit. I ended up kind of just becoming overwhelmed with my emotions, and I fall back into the dirt and stare up at the sky. The sky's very bright today, and it actually looks quite nice. After a moment, I kind of stop hearing the voices so much. They kind of just slowly fade out, like somebody slowly turning down the volume on a record, and I get up. I realize now that whatever these things are has gone now, and I'm just here alone, very confused as to what's actually just happened to me. I get up, and I'm sure there's going to be an explanation for this. I ended up scouring around for probably another hour and a half until I conclude that nothing's here. That's when my panic finally catches up with me, and I decide that I need to get back as quick as possible. I start making my way there. I eventually get back to the station and immediately write down my report. I didn't speak to anybody else about what had happened, and that's when I'm confused. I suddenly realised that what I was reading was very similar to some of the reports of what had happened years before. The ones where that people had considered the guys that were reporting it a little bit crazy or seeing things. And for that reason, I actually took the report and ended up throwing it into the trash. I didn't want my colleagues to think I was crazy. I mean, I didn't like most of them to begin with. I knew that this was going to hurt me moving on to the other areas that I wanted to work, so there was going to be no benefit of me actually posting this. And I ended up moving on and working as a ranger in different areas and doing different kinds of roles too, even being a fire service worker. Now here's the weird thing. I only realised it much later, but I did have a son, and he looked exactly like I knew he would. The job that I changed into is exactly what I heard I would. My wife's role too. Also, some family members that died, they were the exact people who I was told would do so as well. Now suddenly I felt kind of a weird fear come over me, almost like a wash and flood of emotions coming back, realising that something had contacted me back then, and for whatever reason wanted me to know what was going to happen. I can't put my finger on why this happened or how it happened to me. I just know what I saw was real, and that I wasn't the only person that saw those kinds of things out there. Lots of my other colleagues had experienced some very similar things, and I just don't know what to make of it all. So I live in Austin, Texas. We have a metropolitan park located in North Austin that's almost 300 acres. I visit this park often and have never had a weird experience until now. This park has a ton of trails for mountain bikes and hiking. There are also other areas that have creeks which run through the park. Now 2 days ago, I took my 4 kids and myself on the trail hiking. We arrived at the trailhead around 4 PM and started our hike. There are 3 bridges over water that we passed during the hike. Each bridge was at least half a mile apart. Our destination required us to pass along all 3 bridges before we started to make our way back. We made it to our destination. As we start walking back, we don't have any issues, only the occasional mountain biker who passes us by. On the way back, as we walk over the second bridge, my kids and I, now they're all under the age of 10, heard someone very clearly in a female voice say, "Hi dear, come over here," twice, from under the bridge. The first time we heard it, we all stop in our tracks and look at each other like, "Did you hear that?" My 9-year-old daughter even asked me, "Mum, what was that? Did you hear this?" And my 3-year-old appears very perplexed. There was no one in sight. I even look under the bridge and I can't see anybody there. I can hear rustling though, and then I hear it again, identical in tone and pitch and duration. "Hi dear, come over here," almost robotic. This was about an hour or so into the hike, around 5 PM. At that point, we all started swiftly walking towards the trailhead. No one said a word the whole time. I remained calm, as I always carry my side piece, so I had a form of self-defense to rely on, but still, it definitely spooked us out. Now there's a playground not far from the trailhead. I asked my kids if they want to play on the playground and they all say no without missing a beat, and we go straight back. I still have no idea what it was. It sounded just like a recording, but it wasn't. For a little bit of background about myself, I've worked my entire adult life in the Pacific Northwest woods. That's over 15 years in total, and about 7 of them being at the Park Service at the Olympic National Park. Many experiences over the years could warrant the title of creepy, but this one particular one truly sticks with me. While working for the Park Service, one of my jobs was to be a restoration carpenter. We would travel to old backwoods historical cabins, emergency shelters and homesteads, and other things, tasked with repairing and restoring them to their original historical accurate states. Now this is truly a wonderful yet demanding job. I'd spend 8 days at a time living off the beaten path, usually deep in the backcountry. Sometimes we'd been flown in supplies, sometimes we'd use llamas or mules to pack our gear, all the while sleeping in a thinly walled single tent, cooking over a fire or whisper-lit stove, using the same tools and techniques of the original homesteaders that they had at their disposals in the 1800s to construct and survive in this unforgiving land. One night, in late fall, I was assigned to work near Lake Ozette at the old homestead off the trail. Near the constructed boardwalk, for those unfamiliar with the area, Lake Ozette is 8 miles long and 3 wide. It sits as the largest unaltered natural lake in Washington. Lake Ozette has a long and rich history of Native American culture. The Maca Tribal Center in Neah Bay houses discoveries found in the area dating back to 2,000 years ago, along with a local village that is well preserved over 300 years ago by a mudslide that left most of the artifacts there intact. Now, the Ozette Loop Trail, which the homestead was directly adjacent to, is approximately 9.4 miles through and through. The man-made boardwalk takes you under giant cedar groves, meanders through giant patches of chest-high salal before eventually delivering you to Alströmer's Prairie, about 2.5 miles from the trailhead. Now, this Alströmer's Prairie is a giant soggy meadow which was once farmed by 2 Swedish immigrants. They constructed a small cabin and some outbuildings on the 150-acre bog, with cattle, sheep, vegetable gardens, and help of a little Swedish ingenuity. They're actually able to live out here for over 50 years. Over time, the forest, as it always does, decided to take back which was once its own. The now decades-long abandoned farm was hardly recognizable. Our job was to get it back and encroach the forest, put new windows into the main cabin, pipe in a new stove, apply fresh paint, and just generally fix up portions of it. Now, the ultimate goal being guided tours to take place in the future sometime. For about 3 weeks we stayed at the bunkhouse while working at the Astrums. This was good duty for us. We weren't sleeping under rain, our beds were warm, our hike was short, and the train wasn't difficult. We even had TV. The bunkhouse was located near the highway and ranger station. We would hike the 5-mile loop every day, bring in with us our boards, tools, and paint, and everything else we needed. Now, these were 10+ hour days, and we usually started in the morning at around 7 hiking and returning at around 5. Now, at one point during the fall, there were 4 of us working this project, but at the time of this event, there was only 2 of us remaining. Most of the hard work had been finished now, and we decided to hike a few last boards into the prairie to complete a portion of the wood wash before we called it done. I volunteered to go back and bring everything. Now, my only job being to carry as many boards as I could muster in each trip, before returning to the ranger station to load the next time. It was late in the season for hikes at this point. The weather had turned, and we'd be lucky to see 2 or 3 people a day doing the loop. Around my 4th and final trip, it was pretty tiring. I was getting really tired of it, and it's late now. At around 4, myself and my co-worker called it a day. I thought I could get 1 more trip in before it gets dark, my rationale being that the more trips I did today, the less I would have to do tomorrow. We ended up pushing on and continue and start our hike back to the ranger station. The lighting on the boardwalk was quite low at this point, and the cedars blocking most of the ambient light left by the setting sun and making visibility quite diminished. Now, I'm not a nervous hiker, and I don't really get scared easily at all. Having solo hiked for weeks on end in the backcountry, I've been stalked by cougars, confronted by Klondike bears in Alaska. I've even run into a few demented hillbillies over the years. As I left the prairie that evening, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end, goosebumps erupt on my forearms, and an uneasy feeling sweeps over me. Suddenly I walk faster, and then sprint. I did, and I didn't have to think about it, and I try and convince myself that I've been reading too many stories. I walked another 5 minutes or so before I start hearing something faint, sounding just like music. Impossible, I tell myself. I'm so far from civilization. It can't actually be what's out there. But sure enough, I hear music, and specifically a piano. It started out so faint that I stopped moving and actually try and hear it. The steps on the wooden boardwalk are so loud, but every time I stop, it becomes louder. Now I stood there, sun now fully hidden behind the horizon, in total silence other than the piano. I became aware that there were no longer sounds of life, no birds, no insects, no wind, no rustling of leaves or underbrush. Absolutely silent, yet the piano is present, as if everything was being weighed down by a fog of emptiness of sorts. I've encountered this dead before in the woods, but never quite like this. I tried to keep focus on the keys, but I can't recognize the composition. Not really surprisingly though, because I usually listen to Metallica. Now, it was playing with a purpose and controlled in tune, thoughtful. It was a song, and somehow I felt that it was meant for just me in this moment. I start walking again slowly, almost on cue for the music, but it once again gets louder as my pace increased. So did the tempo of the keys, still in tune, never faltering. It reached a climax, a perfect combination of my haste, dread, heartbeat, and God knows what else. Now, it then quickly whooshed away as quickly as it come, not trailing off or fading, just gone, and suddenly everything was back how it was, with a gust of wind. The stillness was gone, the gloom and creepiness had left. My next step on the boardwalk went pretty much normally, and it was almost like it never happened. Now, I didn't hear the piano again that night, nor since. I told my co-worker every detail when I reached the bunkhouse. He showed no signs of disbelief. We didn't talk about it again until years later, when something similar happened to another park employee, another ranger. When I told my grandfather about what happened, who was a retired state park ranger, he said, "Oh, the piano again?" And apparently he'd hear bagpipes when he heard it when he was younger. Now this didn't directly happen to me, but I live in the area where it happened. Now me and my friends were discussing scary things that we've seen in the woods, and he told me a story that happened to his friend. So this guy with 5 of his friends was spending a day in a cabin, hunting and trapping. They were not drunk but had a few beers to unwind one night. So one of them goes to the outhouse and to the bathroom and swears that he can hear the sound of a drum beating. So he finishes off in the outhouse and goes into the cabin and tells his friends to come back and check out the sound. So they all grab their rifles and walk out of the ridge from their cabin and down to the hollow and behind it, and then back up to the other side. It's actually quite a rocky area, and the sound actually travels really far, and they can tell that the sound's coming from over the hill. So 5 of them spread out about 50 meters apart and walk up over the top. They couldn't see down over there because of the bushes around, so the 5 of them wait there, and one of them sneaks down to see what it was. When he got there, he stood and watched for 30 seconds to a minute before he turned around and went to his friends as fast as he could, telling them he saw evil and that they had to get out of there. All he would tell them is that he saw a bunch of naked men and women dancing around a circle, chanting in some foreign language. He never told them about everything he saw. The guy told my friend this story actually hung back and didn't go down, so he wasn't sure exactly what this person had seen himself. When I was about 5 years old, I was playing by the edge of the woods behind my grandmother's house. I played there often, and my grandmother kept an eye on me from the kitchen or living room because the house had huge windows that faced the woods. She would come out every once in a while just to see what I was getting up to. I was obsessed with digging in the dirt and collecting unusual rocks and arrowheads that littered the land where my grandmother lived. I should mention that this is in the Midwest Illinois, not far from the Cherokee Mounds, so finding arrowheads was not actually that uncommon. Anyway, that day, I still remembered picking out a spot to dig. I had been out there for quite a while because I remembered I had dug a pretty good sized hole. Then something caught my eye up in the tree that I was next to. I almost don't know how to explain it, but it looked like a heat wave coming off the branch of the tree. It was fall. I remembered because I had my pink jacket on, and remembered thinking that my mum was going to be annoyed because I had dirt around the bottom of my arms from digging. I also remembered there being a lot of leaves on the ground. Anyway, I am staring at this heat wave and realised that it was human shape. So here I am, 5 years old, wondering why that there's an invisible man in the tree. I remembered feeling scared but unsure what to do. Then, it started moving and making a faint clicking sound. This is about the time that I decided that I was not supposed to be seeing this, and I hightailed it back to my house. My grandmother saw that I was pretty shaken, and I remember telling her that this is what's happened, and thinking that it was an angel. Now in my 5-year-old mind, I don't know what else it could have been. I never heard of aliens or ghosts or monsters, so to me, it had to be an angel because that's all my little brain can think of. Fast forward to when I'm about 12 years old. By the time this encounter happened, it was way out of my mind. I love watching action and sci-fi movies. My dad rented a movie called Predator. I am watching it with him. And the first time you see the Predator/invisible cloaking, I'm petrified. All the memories from that day digging in the dirt came flooding back to me. I asked my dad if the Predator's real or if there's any animal that had that kind of ability that I wasn't sure of. He said no, it's all fake. It wasn't like it was today where you can just Google it. I had no access to the internet, so again, I put it out of mind. Now fast forward to about the year 2004. I'm grown, have 3 small children. I just went through a separation. Now, I moved to the next town over to an apartment with my children. These apartments are all 1-level duplexes where there are 5 buildings. I am at the very last apartment of the last building. The apartments are considered in town but are really on the outskirts. There is a deep ditch that runs behind the building with a chain link fence that separates the backyard from the ditch. There are about 6 or 7 trees on our side of the fence. If you follow the ditch a little bit, you hit a small forest that eventually leads to a country with a larger forest and land. Now, I'm a smoker, but I wouldn't smoke in the apartment because of my children, so I often go out to the back porch to smoke. One night, I was up late doing laundry and stuff after the kids went to bed. I decided to take a smoke break before I myself went to sleep. I am back there on the porch and start hearing a clicking sound, and immediately looked to the ditch because I had seen a groundhog out there a few days before and thought perhaps he was out there again. The yard is fairly lit, but not too well actually, and there's a playground that is right to the end of my back porch. I didn't turn on my porch light. I didn't normally. If I was just going out there for a quick smoke, I wouldn't. Now, I didn't see any groundhog or movement from the ditch, so I go back to smoking my cigarette. The faint clicking sound keeps happening, and I see a slight shift of movement which actually shakes me up, which goes into the tree to the left of my porch. It's there. The same invisible thing that I had seen when I was 5. It's kind of distorted and has a humanoid shape. It is crouched down, or has a branch or something coming out from around the tree, which is wrapped onto it, or maybe it's holding the tree, and I can't believe it. I was like, is this happening? Has this come to kill me from all those years ago? All I could think about was my kids in the apartment sleeping, so I ran in, slammed and locked the door. I ran to the kids' room and make sure that they're all locked. Then I just turn on the lights to the living room and stare out the blinds at the tree to see if I can catch another glimpse of it. I sat there for about a good 10 minutes and can't see anything. I begin to think that I'm just tired and that my mind was playing tricks on me. Just as I finally start talking myself to calm down, my neighbour's dog comes running across the backyard and starts barking at the tree at the same branch that I'd seen this predator thing, and it freaks me out because the dog was not a barker. I've actually never heard him barking at anything, even at the groundhog that had been out there hanging out in the ditch. The dog actually goes on barking now for quite a number of minutes until eventually the lady who owns it calls him back inside, and the dog reluctantly returns back home, stopping every few feet to look back at the branch. That's until he's out of my sight. I didn't sleep that night and have never seen anything like it again. I don't even know what to think of it. I'm a grown woman now. I have kids and a good career. I just can't make out what this could have possibly been. Now, for context, I do believe in paranormal. I've had encounters and experiences as my mum and grandma. This was a little different and not as scary, just weird. I was manager of a very well-known drugstore and took a back road to the store every day for about 2 years. Now, it was semi-rural, as it had once been acres of farmland that was now being developed and sold to developers. Just for some insight into the area, my ex-in-laws lived in the area for about 30 years on 200 acres and had a cattle farm. They still live nearby, just on a smaller farm, so this is a very frequented area to drive to by family, and my ex knew the area well. This was a heavily mained area, and there's a lot of strange things that happen here. There was also a huge landfill in the area. Now, I was coming home one day, July-ish, not too tired, and was looking across the cornfields as I come around a bend and noticed a house on the edge of the fields that I'd never seen before. It was very unassuming and red, with a small peak roof and a porch in front. My first thought was not, wow, I've never seen this before. It was instead, how do people get into it? There are no driveways leading there. Weird, in 2015 there had to be a driveway. As I continued and rounded a bend, I couldn't see the house anymore, but was looking a few houses over, and I also can't see driveways into them. There's also nobody there. Now, by this point, I come across a very well-travelled intersection in a huge church, so I just stay alert and keep driving. Later, I'm telling my ex about this house and how weird it felt. And all the time that I've driven there, I never noticed it. I went to work the next day, coming home the only way that I knew, and it wasn't there. None of it was there. I don't know what I saw that day, but I can see the house very clearly in my head. I seriously don't know what to make of this. Now, my wife and I have found a lot of paranormal activity after moving into a wooded area just outside of Pittsburgh. Our house is isolated from the neighborhood. That only makes the fear of something terrible happening worse. I would like to point out that me and my wife are logical, rational thinkers who are educated to some degree, not able to explain events or what happened. Now, incident 1 was first things that animals were dying in the wild, which is common, but hearing the screams and struggling of pain, almost like they're being tortured, is not normal. It sends chills down my spine. Second, walking in the woods accompanied by my wife and kids, we stumbled upon a small clearing in the woods, under the leaves where children's shoes are. Shoes are worn out as if they've been there for a long time. 3. This one's hard to believe, trust me, I know. I was in denial. I didn't tell my wife what I'd seen for weeks. Now, I didn't want to catch this thing after seeing what it was, but I was outside smoking a cigarette on the second floor. Now, while on my phone, I had a feeling that I'm being stared at. I glance away from my phone to look. In my peripheral vision, I catch a humanoid shape. I say peripheral because it was almost like I couldn't focus on it. It bolted into the woods behind my home, completely off guard and terrified. I didn't even watch it run into the woods. I looked straight ahead and acted like I never saw it, like a deer in headlights. I acted like scared prey. This creature wasn't human, and that's why I was terrified. It was tall, had shoulders and a head, no hair, and colour of skin that I can't make out. It's weird, it's like my brain couldn't process it well. As I said straight, completely frozen in fear, I'm hearing the strides of this thing. Now, I don't know what it was. Months go by and get to 4 now. Now, same bathroom window where I saw that. Now, we open the window to smoke, and it sounds like it's gonna pour down. Both of us are completely confused because no water's falling from the sky. I walk downstairs to go outside and try and understand what's going on. The garden hose is on, and the handle is pushed into the dirt, shooting water into a tree, making a weird sound. None of us put it there. Now, incident 5. We feel like we're being watched one night in the daytime, and the woods are normal and somewhat peaceful. We constantly have an eerie feeling though. Now 6. At this moment we become interested and are sitting by our window every night trying to find explanations to what the humanoid thing is. We made conversation on a different subject when a loud crack came from the ground right below us. It was loud enough that both of us jumped and quickly locked the window. It sounded like a bat or axe hitting the ground really hard, but nothing should have been able to make that sound because of how the ground is. Now 7. As we're laying in my bed, my wife woke me up at 2 AM and said that she smells burning plastic and thought something's on fire. We have a 2-story house and had a bedroom window cracked, and we look outside to find the cause of the smell and saw a lit up triangular shaped thing in the back of the house deep in our woods. It was orange lights and blue lights and orbs that we can see, and shadows of people walking around the triangular thing. We were very scared and called the cops, but doubt set in and we checked the window again and this is gone. 8. After all of this, we still stay active. So we went on a walk one evening with the children around the neighbourhood and just observed a really nice sunset basically. We head home and obviously this place is weird. We would want to walk outside and we decide to go to our gravel driveway, which is about 100 yards away. Trees on all sides, bushes and smaller trees below them. After about maybe 15 feet onto the driveway, we noticed bats flying down the right and left. We'd only seen a couple up to this point. Maybe they're bugs. I look around and with no car, I start walking down the driveway and my wife on the opposite side. The further I go, the more scary it becomes now. I don't know what it was. I underestimated the amount of bats. I start running because my children are frightened. As soon as I start running, I'm not kidding, they begin to clear a flight path up with my head. They would turn around probably 5 feet from my face or even closer. I'm not exaggerating. As I'm running trying to avoid these, I hear my wife screaming as she beats me home. My daughter's on the verge of tears. She was so scared. And I know bats are absolutely full of different diseases, and that's why I was really scared. Now 9. I personally didn't see this, but it doesn't add up. One Saturday, my husband's parents were over for dinner when he came to me and said, "Hey, my mum saw some girl with a black sundress coming out of the woods and going even further down, trying to reach us. Without knowing the layout of the land, I don't know how this person could have came across here. There's no easy way to get to us, and it's not the kind of place that you would travel. This would have meant that whoever this is had basically come out of the middle of nowhere. Why would they be doing this?" And 10. And the last one. Now, if either one of us go out to smoke at night at the window in our bathroom, we often hear a bell sound, kind of like a Chinese ceremonial dong thing. Being skeptical, we presume that these are wind chimes. We looked and there's no wind chimes at my neighbour's house, and the bells sound like they're coming from the southeast side of the property, and we can't explain it. My family loves to go on vacation in Sweden, and my grandmother even has a cottage in the forest that all the family members can use if they want. A couple of years ago, when I was around 20, I was on vacation there with my mum and my grandma sometime in autumn for about 10 days. This is the Swedish backwoods where we go there to unwind, to enjoy the nature and take a rest from civilization, hiking, canoeing and foraging for mushrooms, sitting around the fireplace in the evening and that kind of thing. It's not completely isolated. You can still find a couple of villages and fields here and there. It's definitely not very rural though, and you don't have to encounter people if you don't want to. No, I've always liked to go exploring on my own, finding new paths through the woods, fixing our old maps to better reflect the current landscape. The maps you can buy of this area haven't been updated in ages, and many paths don't exist anymore because nature swallowed them long ago. What I also like is exploring abandoned buildings, and in rural Sweden it's great for that. Back in the 1800s, Swedish people in the countryside were very poor and starving, so they moved to the New World in search of a better life. You can still find the foundations of farmhouses, even the foundations of entire small villages in the woods, sometimes which have been rusted for over 100 years, or farmland equipment there. Also, like so many countries, Sweden has an issue with rural exodus nowadays. Middle-aged and younger people move away to the cities. Old people stay there until they die usually, and nobody buys the house that they once lived in, and it just sits there abandoned. This actually happens quite a lot. You can find many empty houses in the forest, and I love sneaking around in them. Most of them have already been looted, presumably by hunters, loggers and other hikers, but sometimes you can still find interesting things, and lots of things there that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. It's very rare to meet anybody out there in the woods. So one crisp autumn day, I took one of our bicycles, a map. Now GPS is mostly not a thing out there, my phone, but it usually doesn't have reception, and some food and water. Now I did actually tell my mum and grandma, and I wanted to be back by nightfall at the very latest and set out exploring. On the map, I had chose a wide loop that I guessed would take about 3 hours if the paths were clear, and I didn't stop to explore. But even if I did, I guess I had plenty of time until dusk. I had a lot of fun at first, driving the mountain bike down smaller and smaller forest paths, finding foundations of old buildings, and some root cellars that are still intact and have some mushrooms there. I had some problems with the map because, like I said, many of the paths are still there, but no longer exist like they once did, so it's hard to see. So I had to turn back a few times, but I mostly had a pretty good idea of where I was. Of course, that made it take longer than I expected, and when I reached the point furthest from the loop, I go into a narrow path that according to the map would take me back in an hour. Now the sun's already decently low in the sky. At this point I'm feeling a bit uneasy, I have to admit it, because of my bad time management and because I was worried that I could trust the map less than I thought. Also, shortly before turning onto the path, I had found some traps in the wood that kind of creeped me out a bit. They were 3 big cages, each with a platform in the middle that was connected to a steel door in front. On those platforms were some animal remains, rotted with bones sticking out. It hadn't been touched in ages of bait. I guess since the doors were still open though, maybe they climbed in. I had taken a stick and deactivated the traps by putting and pushing onto the platforms through the cage bars. Any hunters might feel that this was a bad move, but I hated the idea of a fox or marten or something being trapped in there. When those doors had snapped shut, it had been so loud that I actually flinched, and afterwards I noticed how quiet it is. Now, I was clumsily cycling along on that uneven ground as the sun was setting. I had this uncomfortable feeling that everything was sort of aware of me, if that makes sense. It wasn't the feeling of being watched, but just too quiet. Just quietness, that's it. After a while, I come upon a crossroad in a more open area where I was supposed to follow the path straight on. There were trees not so high here, and I guess that this had been one of those clearings created by a severe storm some 10 years back. Or maybe there had just been loggers in the past, who knows. At the crossroads was a tiny wooden building. Somewhere between a shed and a cabin, I had originally set out to find abandoned houses, and so far had only seen some stone foundations and root cellars. So even at this point, I really should have just hurried to get back, but curiosity got the better of me, and I wanted to check this thing out and have a look inside. It wasn't locked, but the door was kind of stuck in the frame for a moment, and I can't tear it loose. Inside of the cabin was a cot, a tiny oven, and massive taxidermy animals everywhere. Now, I didn't think they could fit into this tiny thing. There were too many there. There were even some on the cot and in the oven, now to the ceiling and walls. The entirety of the inside of the cabin also, every inch of it had a thick layer of black mold, so much so that some of the animals you can't actually tell what they once were. Others I could guess from the shape. They all look monstrous covered in that stuff, and the smell of rotten mold is overwhelming. I quickly tried to close the door again, but the wood had warped so much it wasn't quite possible, so I left it hanging slightly open and get out of there. As I was cycling away from the cabin, I felt strange. This time, I did feel like I was being watched, and not kind of nonsensely thinking. I thought, you should have closed the door behind you, you should have done that. I don't know why I thought of this, but it made me uneasy, so it didn't sit right with me. I then think, why does it matter? And tell myself to stop. Maybe 10 minutes later, the path enters a stretch of older woods with much higher trees. The sun was now close to the horizon, and the sky was full of orange light. Under the fir trees, it was getting very dark, and I checked my phone. I want to tell my mum, but of course no reception. A couple more minutes into the dark forest and the path has vanished. At this point I have two options. Try to push through with my bike until I met a logging road, which was hopefully there on the other side of that stretch of woods that could take me back, or even return to get past the mouldy shed again, then try to go my way back home. Basically, the second option was not an option for me, as I'd already said that I would be getting back, and I knew that I was going to have to zigzag and improvise now. Going all the way back would take ages, and I could get more lost going deeper into the darkness. I didn't want to lose my way, but also, I really didn't want to go past the shed again. I had a sudden aversion to even look behind me. As dusk was creeping through the forest, I was getting properly paranoid at this point. The uneasy feeling crystallized into the idea that I had disturbed something there, and that because I left the door open, something was following me now and had come out after me. I know it's stupid, but I cannot shake the feeling. Going past the shed, past those traps and through the ruins of the old village, past the open mouths of the root cellar, and getting into the darkness is a horrible feeling. Now yes, I might get lost trying to go through the woods in front of me, and I would have to push and maybe even carry my bike. But the woods didn't seem to stretch out too far in front, only left and right, so it seemed like the better option now. I was just hoping at this point that the supposed logging road was still there. I mean, it could not be. After tearing through it for a bit, I found what I guessed to be the remnants of an old path because the ground was sort of lower there, and I tried to follow it until I come upon another set of ruins. And again, foundations appear from the farmhouse, presumably. Behind that, the ground slopes into a marshy area with birches that seem very white in the gloom of the trees. Now I stop and listen. I still didn't want to turn around. Now I can't hear anything, but I have the ugly feeling of being watched or followed, and it only increases at this point. I felt like not only was something coming after me, but like the forest itself was aware of my presence, listening or watching. Like it was deliberately quiet. I was feeling so scared that I didn't even try to talk myself out of it anymore, and just accepted what I was dealing with. I'd left some food in my backpack. Half a sandwich and some sesame snacks, and then of course, mushrooms I found earlier. I took it all out, laid it out on a stone, and I said, please let me go, I'm sorry. I won't come back, I promise. After that, I grabbed my bike and went down into the swamp, still not looking back. Luckily, it turned out it wasn't a large swamp or anything. Really just a wet patch for about 300 meters until the ground sloped upwards again. So, I quickly grab my bike and try and push as hard as I can. Now I'm constantly going through these muddy parts and it's hard not to get stuck. When I emerge on the other side, I was soaked in sweat and my feet were wet and muddy to mid-calf. I stop frequently to listen for anything around me, but there's nothing. And then, wouldn't you know it, the trees opened up and there it is, the logger's path. I could have cried with joy and relief in this moment. I stepped onto the road and turned back to look behind me, but I can't even see the swamp through the trees anymore. It was almost completely dark by now. But luckily, there was some moonlight, and I make my way. I climb on my bike and pedal as fast as I could. About half an hour later, I had some cell reception and managed to call my mum and tell her what happened. Or well, at least say I didn't get lost. I didn't want her to know that I'd worked up in such a panic over something. She was already worried, and that horrible feeling I had back there in the woods eased up gradually. I even start to see some animals now, and I hear an owl and a deer. By the time I arrive at the cabin, I feel okay again, yet exhausted.